Welcome back, everyone. Open the Books is continuing to investigate American universities using diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joining us now is OpenTheBooks.com Deputy Public Policy Editor Rachel O'Brien. Welcome to the National News Desk, as always, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, today we're talking about Rutgers and what they're doing. What did you find out?
Right, so we've been looking at universities across the country, public schools, who get taxpayer funds. And so, as we know, President Trump has banned using federal funds for DEI, and some universities have laid off DEI staff. So far, we have only seen Rutgers cancel one conference. This was a conference that was funded by the Department of Labor, and this was due to the president's order. So, as far as we know, all DEI staff and programming at Rutgers is intact. So we looked at their payroll last year. Rutgers spent $10 million on 136 employees in DEI roles. That's the equivalent of in-state tuition and fees for over 500 students. And you have very highly paid people. You've got the highest paid is the senior VP for equity and inclusion, earning $342,000. The senior vice chancellor for diversity, inclusion, community engagement, $245,000. And so you see this very highly paid people, and this is all really, something we're questioning, because DEI isn't about equality or equal opportunity, although it could be. It's a radical ideology. It forces people into groups of oppressor and oppressed, and it does the opposite of the claims to be inclusive. It's divisive, and it makes racial prejudice okay.
Well, you've talked about universities receiving funds from hostile foreign governments. Tell us about Rutgers. You're investigating Rutgers as well.
That's right. Yes. So we talked about Ohio State University here on this show. It's the vice president's alma mater. So universities do get funds from foreign funders and state governments that try to buy influence in higher education. So some of the largest donations come from Saudi Arabia and China. These countries have track records of human rights abuses. They're often at odds with American interests. So Rutgers got $285 million from foreign sources since 2013. More than $26 million came from China and almost $4 million from Hong Kong. Rutgers has partnered with China. They have a Beijing center and a China office. Rutgers has also gotten $630,000 from Saudi Arabia, $300,000 for Qatar in the last decade. You have these countries that are teaching American students to hate the West, in many cases to hate Jews. And so Rutgers even gave in to student protesters this year. They agreed to build, or late last year rather, they agreed to build a new Arab Cultural Center, and they're giving out scholarships to displaced Gazan students who can study at Rutgers. So they've really got to just tread lightly and look at what they're teaching. Like DEI, these countries and their institutions, they have values at odds with America. So by universities taking their money, they're likely inviting that influence into classrooms.
And you mentioned the one recent conference funded by the Labor Department got canceled. How much funding does Rutgers get from the U.S. government?
So since 2020, Rutgers has received nearly $3 billion in federal money. And so just a couple examples of some of that spending is $300,000 from the Department of Agriculture to do a study to convince Americans to eat more farmed seafood. Another over $100,000 from the National Science Foundation to study the racial factors in deporting immigrants with criminal records. They, of course, found there was racial ethnic disparities in people being deported, which is, of course, because the people being deported for committing crimes are often going to differ ethnically by virtue of their countries of origin. So we send lots of money for research. We send lots of money for studies. The university also took almost $300 million in higher education relief funds during the COVID lockdown. And this is while they have almost $2 billion in their endowment. So Rutgers has plenty of money to pay for whatever it needs without having to take money from foreign governments and from the U.S. government.
OpenTheBooks.com Deputy Public Policy Editor Rachel O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.